Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Misty Wild, COO of Culturati, and I'm really glad you're here. For those who may be new to our community, Culturati brings together C-suite and senior executive leaders, founders, operators, scholars, and investors for candid, research-grounded conversations about culture, trust, and how work is actually changing. I want to briefly acknowledge the broader context many people are carrying into work right now. We're navigating a fraught time, in addition to rapid technological change, the heavier human reality, and that lived experience is shaping focus, judgment, and trust, whether we name it or not. That's part of why today's session matters, and I just want to ground that in humans showing up as humans for each other. On to the AI. As AI becomes embedded across our organizations, work is splitting in a very real way because what we automate and what we deliberately keep human takes incredible judgment and forethought as we also look at leadership pipelines. Increasingly, advantage isn't coming from the tools themselves, but from that judgment, what leaders choose to delegate to AI and what they protect as human, and how clearly those choices are communicated. Those decisions will shape trust, accountability, and how work functions long into the future. Today, we're joined by Gwen Hamas, co-CEO of Chrometrics, who brings fresh research and real operating experience to this question, working with global brands on how experimentation, decision-making, and growth continues to evolve. Gwen will be in conversation with Al D, founder of The Edge of Work, who many of you know for his thoughtful perspective at the intersection of leadership, talent, and the future of work. Together, they'll unpack what this division actually looks like inside organizations, adopting AI at scale, where efficiency strengthens trust, where it weakens it, and how leaders can redesign roles, incentives, and career paths around judgment, context, and responsibility. Before we begin, I also want to offer a sincere thank you to our dear friend Katie of Remix Communications for connecting us and helping make today's conversation possible. Katie has an incredible ability to bring together the right people at the right moment, and we're so grateful for that. Al, Gwen, welcome. I will let you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to be here with you all. My name is Al D. As I was introduced, I am the founder of The Edge of Work. I spend most of my days doing speaking and training and helping organizations navigating this changing world of work. But I also have the privilege of hosting the Edge of Work podcast, where I get to talk to folks, very smart folks like Gwen, about the intersection of talent, leadership, and the future of work. And I'm delighted to be here today in this conversation, really thinking about what is that line between automation and human judgment. Gwen, we had a wonderful intro of you in the beginning, but I want to turn it over to you. Would you like to share anything else, a little bit more about your background or your bio that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And Al, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I think, one of the things just about me and kind of my background is I am always very much a believer in kind of learning by doing, getting outside of my comfort zone, trying new things, whether that was, earlier in my career, taking a role at a company actually in Mexico City and living there in 5 years and navigating the culture and the people and the language through an advertising agency to even coming to Chrometrics about a year ago. Most of my background has been in advertising. And so really focusing on what I call kind of the tip of the spear, where we're able to drive tangible growth for organizations through revenue, top line as well as bottom line, has been kind of that way. And I think this conversation today, I'm hopeful that I'll be able to share some of not only my insights, but some of the kind of the hands-on ways that we're actually leveraging experimentation for our work, for our workforce, and gaining a sense of kind of what works, what we want to double down on, what we've tried, what doesn't, and also being able to share some of the stories and some of the insights and research that we've seen on this topic. So I just hope it becomes a very, useful and actionable way for each of the listeners who are tuning in today to have some thought about, what other things can they do for their org and for their people moving forward.
Thank you for that intro. And for the folks who have joined us today live, thank you for being here. If you've got questions or comments throughout, feel free to use the chat. We'll have someone on the team monitoring them and we'll make sure that we get to them. But we certainly would love to hear from you in any of the perspectives that you might have. Okay, let's just jump right in. Let's pay off some bills for bringing the people here to talk about this. And so, again, the name of this conversation is how AI is redrawing the line between automation and human judgment. And I think what's interesting, Gwen, is that you work and have worked in an industry, advertising, which is increasingly driven by technology to do something that is incredibly human, which is to connect with consumers. And so, maybe as a starting point for this conversation, if we think about how we see a technology like AI really redefining what it means to be human at work, or what it means to really drive value in human work. What do you think we should be thinking about, or how specifically should we be? Are you seeing things change about how organizations should be thinking about roles between what might be something that the a human creates value versus what might be something that a machine or an automation or AI creates value with?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two ways that I always frame it, right? And Misty kind of included this in her intro, but you really think about, the difference between the what and the how. And
Mm,
AI is really the how. Any kind of tech is the how. That is helping you achieve what either solving problems or going after opportunities or, making things actually happen. And I think the what and even the why is really kind of where the human um, plays the most pivotal role, right? I always actually talk about how AI, I think of it as IA as an imagination accelerator. And it's
mm.
how do we as humans really kind of take that imagination of what is the new to the world thinking? What are the different types of pieces that we can bring forth to solve problems or think of a new way? And then we're using AI to pressure test that, to challenge us, to think about how do we actually then make that into a 7 point plan, or how do we kind of actually create different apps or different tech or tools that can help us in that. And so I really think about this almost as that like symbiotic relationship between how AI is powering and empowering the humans, but never replacing them, because what makes us uniquely human is our ability to creatively problem solve and bring forth imagination.
So I don't know if this lands for you at all, but I'll share it in case you want to take it or run with it. But I think there's two. I think what you're saying, and I think this is mirrors what I'm thinking about, is that there is the actual practical doing of things, which AI certainly plays a role in, or technology plays a role in, and continues to play a role in. And if you think about whether you want to call them principles, whether you want to call them uniquely human things, there are the things that a human can do that is unique in how they're able to do those things to contribute value of some kind. And in some cases, some of those things you can actually use AI to accelerate or to improve or to raise the bar of what you could previously do as a human as a result of that. Or in some cases, you may just want to just leave it to something that you, as a human, choose to just do solely as a human. Does that land
Mhm.
at all, or does that resonate or make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I almost think maybe if I kind of like reposition it the way we're thinking about it, it's almost in kind of like those three areas or those like three different levels or tiers. So I'd almost say at the bottom is kind of like automating or taking kind of those low
Hmm.
value annoying, or as we kind of call internally, like the paper cuts, and how do you automate those away? I think the
Hmm.
second layer is really saying, okay, well, what are the things that we need to have a little bit more thought and intentionality, and that is what is the role of the human and what is the role of AI or other tech. And then that third one is truly what are those things that are uniquely human. And I use that kind of a framework because one of the big conversations we're having right now is how do we think about the future role of the manager? And
Mm.
literally, just to give you guys some very practical context, we listed out all of the things that we are asking our manager to do, right? From uh, partnering with their people partner to write job descriptions, to being part of the recruiting and interviewing process, to hiring, onboarding, establishing success criteria, one-on-ones, giving feedback, and the list goes on and on. And we said, well, okay, if you think almost about those different tiers that I laid out, what are the things that could actually be automated, and be kind of more of the individual on their accountability. And that could be what is some of the evidence against their success criteria that is very, you know, uh, green, yellow, red type of a rating system versus having, ongoing feedback. What are those things in which we can have, the employee actually leverage AI. So thinking about like AI is a great career coach. And if we have our very clear kind of here are the different growth paths, here are the different success criteria, can have some prompts in terms of what do you want to do? What are you good at? What do you have energy? What do you not like doing? Or as I call the vegetable things. And all of a sudden, that can be a way so that they are kind of taking ownership of their career, but having a really, really clear running start ahead of a conversation with a manager versus how many times has any manager gotten in and, an employee says, what are my career opportunities? Where can I grow? Well, that can actually, I think, empower and enable an employee. And then the third tier is really what are those things? Like, what are those areas that the human touch, the white glove service, the, very like empathetic and emotional role of the humans makes the most sense. And that's part of the discussion and the debate that we're having because, I think we all know that being a good manager takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And that is obviously a very critical piece for employees to be successful. But again, how can we leverage and use AI and other tech and tools to think about that like entire employee experience and make sure we have the right things at the right time at the right place so that the overall experience is exceptional.
I really appreciate that example because I think it speaks to the level of intentionality that I think is really important in this conversation around work role redesign, or for that matter, should humans do it or should AI do it? And even as I'm just talking out loud, I'm actually wondering if should a human do it versus should AI do it, if that maybe is too limiting of a frame. And let me give you an example that's related to what you just shared, which is I think the role of the manager is a great example of just thinking about are we going to see more of this or less of this? If you look at a lot of the headlines right now, you will see a lot of companies that have gone through the task of removing layers of management inside of their
Yep.
organization. And in some cases, these are for reasons that have nothing to do with technology or automation. And in some cases, they say that they have everything to do with technology and automation. But if you just take for the lens for a second that it is something that might you may have less managers in the future. What is really interesting to me is that when we start sometimes to talk about some of those skills that we think are important, we start to say things like judgment or
Hmm.
feedback or
Hmm.
direction. And in my head, I'm thinking like, hey, that sounds like something a really great manager does.
Yeah.
A really great manager does all of those things. So it is this interesting. I don't have an answer for this. I'm more talking about this out loud. I'm wondering
Yeah.
maybe if there's a more expansive way to think about this, because to one degree, we might be limiting the role, but we're also saying that these things are also really important. I don't know if anything comes
That
up for you, but that's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And I think the interesting thing is and you kind of hit the nail on the head, right? If you think about, the senior practitioners in your organization, right? I always say like my kind of go-to when we're having conversations and they're saying, "Hey, I'm dealing with this problem. Here's what I'm thinking about doing. I thought about these few things. I think this is a way." And when I'm like, yes, they got it, I always say, you have excellent instincts. And you start seeing some of this happen, and you're like, your instincts are really good. And that gets back to some of the judgment piece. Now, a lot of times, if you think about um, the way I say we, my age, we all kind of grew up, is you would have to experience a lot of
Yeah.
those things and have a number of different, tough situations and, things you've never experienced before or had to deal with, whether it was an issue with a client or with delivery of something, and kind of build up those instincts on your own. And again, maybe get some feedback and some input and insight from a manager. But it's like
Hmm.
now
Yeah.
you are able to actually put in that context to the AI and say, here's what I'm up against.
Hmm.
What, and you can even say, here are a couple ideas that I have. What am I, one of my favorite things asking ChatGPT is like, what am I missing? What are my blind spots? What haven't I thought about? But it's an easy way that you can actually hone that sense of judgment or at least have another voice that you're not waiting to say like, oh, I want to go to my manager and talk to them about this, but like I need to be really buttoned up before I do it. And so I think it gives people a little bit of like that freedom and almost that safety in order to build up that muscle in kind of real time without, again, kind of waiting to experience those things and have those conversations.
I want to jump back to something you previously said, but to explore a little bit further, and that is around some of those things that we want to collectively protect as things, or
Hmm.
maybe not even protect, but that we want to really make sure that we focus and make a priority for humans to do, particularly as look, like the technology is great today, but I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. So I can only expect it to get better and better. But we've listed off, I think, a couple in terms of judgment and creativity. But anything else you might want to add in terms
Yeah.
of either skills or traits or abilities that we should continue to protect and enable and really prioritize humans to do?
Yeah. And I think it very much depends on what the business you're in. So for
Sure.
us at Chrometrics, we are a digital marketing agency, right? So we're in professional services. And, I always say, as long as there are human clients on the other side, like we will always be in business because going back to that human relationship, if you think about, I say it's very simple. People want to work with people that they like, that they know, and that they trust. And in professional services, that is key. And so when you have, great people, or when, Chrometrics, we have great people that are jumping in on, clients' business, listening to earnings reports, looking around corners, viewing the analytics that are asking for data that maybe we don't even have access to because they're so curious, and then bringing up, either ideas to the clients, say, hey, have you noticed you actually have this problem? And here's maybe an idea. All of that is, I think, what is most important in our business is how are we actually adding outsized value to our clients. Now, again, going back to what I was saying of like being empowered and powered by AI in order to do those things helps you be more efficient at it. So for instance, we're a very big Slack culture. And so we have embedded a lot of different kind of AI bots into our internal channels. And so, for instance, after every morning after an earnings report, we get an AI summary of what that earnings report. It has a link to, the actual presentation and things like that. But you get those very quick hits in terms of here's what's happening in their business. Here is the relevancy to digital marketing. Even here are some of the questions that you should be thinking about if you haven't already. And so it's powering and it's giving more tools to our people, but at the end of the day it's about them, you know taking those and having the conversations with the clients, which at the end of the day matters. And that's where you get into, again, judgment, insights. I say persuasion is a really big
Mm.
skill.
Yeah.
In this
Hmm.
world we're always trying to persuade somebody to do something, think a certain way, take a specific action. And that is where that, the empathy, the contextual, the relationship building, all of those things that I was talking about before really come in, especially in a business like ours.
So, just some anecdotes just to add. I know you mentioned, your context, which is professional services, but one of the things I've been doing lately is I've been having conversations a lot with a lot of folks in my world, which for me have been a lot of HR and talent
Hmm.
and learning leaders. I know many of the folks who are listening also work in HR, but one of the questions I have been asking has been around if imagine you're hiring on your team in 5 years, what are the types of skills or attributes that you're going to be
Yeah.
prioritizing? And the funny thing is that a lot of them say things that essentially mirror what many experienced professionals in professional services do today.
Hmm.
They need people that have a lot of what you just suggested in terms of the ability to problem solve, the ability to build trust with people at all levels, the ability to influence. Certainly there's some other technical things that certainly matter, but in many ways, at least, even though the folks I'm talking to are in a different business than yours per se, I think the realistic reality of it is that some of those things can be applied across a number of other different functions and roles. And I think the one you really hit on, the two you really hit on that resonated with me the most are really that trust and influence piece. Because whether you are trying to influence a client or you're trying to internally get your organization to make a decision, inclusive of whatever machines or robots or whatever they're
Yeah.
giving you, that's going to certainly be
Right.
really, really important no matter what. Um, I want to just go to the comments real quick. Thank you to those of you who put where you're from. We've got some folks who look like they're in some pretty cold locations in the United States, so I hope you thaw out and get some sun and get some warmth. And then just a couple other comments. There is a comment in here. There's a comment that says, I also have experienced a fair number of errors or content that's incorrect upon reading closely and with critical thinking. I do worry about the laziness or blind copy and paste inclination as use of AI increases. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point. And actually, I'm glad, Anita, that you brought this up because that actually gets to another question, Gwen, I did want to ask you, which is really around how do we how do we kind of do these things by I would say like design versus default, right? I think
Hmm.
sometimes, and Anita's comment is really is a really classic example of this, right? Of just throwing it into the LLM and just taking it out and running with it, right? Well, just imagine you're an exec on that same level of just defaulting to whatever something that is telling us versus actually being intentional
Yeah.
about it. Either in terms of how you're thinking about this internally with your company or when you're going out and
Yeah.
talking with other execs, how do you recommend execs really lean into being intentional about these choices versus just assuming or just taking, oh well, we'll just have what the machine tells me do it, et cetera, things like that.
Absolutely. And I think there's three things that I think about. One is obviously we have all heard about human in the loop. So that
Mhm.
continues to be, very important. The second piece is the role of QA. And this is something even today, I was actually speaking with our head of engineering and QA about it as, for us internally, QA has always been actually tied to any experimentation that we're doing. So actually running before we put out a test into the world, we have a full QA a checklist to make sure that everything is right and we have a very high, product quality before anything goes out. And so within the world of AI, it's about how does, QA become that center of excellence across everything that we do. So yes, we're going to have other humans in the loop, but what is the best practice? How are we, we're already experimenting with different like AI QA tools, but those aren't yet at a high fidelity. So that gets to the third point. So if the first one, really is just about human in the loop, the second one is about QA. The third one is how high a fidelity do you need for specific tasks? So for instance, I think, if you're doing a brainstorming with AI, you're going to quickly see if it's hallucinating, all right, you redirect it, you start a new chat, whatever that might be. But if you have some analytics that you're running through it, I mean, your analytics have to be 99.999 100%. And that's why we are extremely cautious with it because it is just not up to stuff. Even at 80
Mhm.
or 90%, that is not okay. That is not something we will stand behind. So while we are continuing to test things and run the parallel human and AI until we have a nearly 100% level of confidence that it is able to do this um, you know, almost at 100% and then even have QA, like we are not going to do that. Alternatively, we have things like some of our strategic roadmaps that we do, and we have a number of
Mhm.
internal tools that we're using AI with. Where again, I would call it like that's the running start for our teams. It's not the end all be all, and so they're taking that as running start based on all of the work we've done for clients across industries and saying based on the context of the client, the problems to solve, the goals you have, everything we've seen from our incredible database of over 30,000. Here's kind of that running start to start thinking about, and then it's our strategists who are working with it and pushing the edges and bringing their imagination. But that's okay if it's only at an 80% correct because it's not something that's going live. And so I think that level of fidelity and truly what we need is actually a really important lens for any organization to determine what do you let it go on its own? Where do you really need kind of the human in the loop and then to what extent?
So I have a lot of other questions I'd love to ask you, but I also would love to get some input from our folks in the audience. I believe we have a couple poll questions that we'll use throughout this time, our time together, and I think we have the first one ready to roll. I believe the first poll question is, where do you see organizations over automating today in ways that undermine trust? And so that poll question is open. And so if you're live or joining us live, feel free to use the poll feature to select your answer and we'll read it off in a second. And then Gwen, if it's all right with you, I'll actually let
Yeah.
you either while folks are listening or putting their answer in to give any thoughts that you might have on this, either through any
Yeah.
of those four choices or anything else you want to add to that question.
Yeah, I think this is a big one, right? And I think a lot of us, when we put our kind of even just consumer hat on, but
Hmm.
also an employee
Yeah.
hat on, you think about like how cold some of those interactions are when you're dealing with a chatbot on a website and they get it wrong. And you're just like, please, can I just talk to a specific person, right? Or even some of the AI now enabled kind of call centers. And so you really have to discern, and this is something that I've talked to some other of our clients about, of like, there's some industries and some businesses where, it's like, I'll take their call center, for instance. They are finding that like 80% of the people that call into their call center actually have login issues getting to their website. Like that is something that can be very easily done through an AI, automation sequence
Hmm.
to help them. And you just have to have those escalation points. But the other 20% actually do require like a human touch to get underneath it. They're usually meteor problems. They're things that aren't so easily solved. And so it's part of actually putting together in their workflows what are those triggers to understand what the problem is, having the confidence and who is best suited to solve this problem. Can it be the AI sequence or is it an actual human? And then making sure that those things are happening right there. But that's usually kind of like one of the biggest ones. I think the separate one, which we're starting to see more and more, and everybody's heard about, AI slop in terms of some of the brand messaging that's out there is, how are you making sure it goes back to the QA piece, but how are you making sure things are up to the standard you want, even when you're using AI? Just because you're, outsourcing something to AI doesn't mean it should have a less of a standard. At the end of the day, the way you show up as a brand, as a business, as a community, like you have to have those brand standards. And that at the end of the day is what's going to continue to garner the trust or erode it over time.
So, just for the folks up there, it looks like the poll responses are in, and it looks like the winner in terms of the answer to the question, where do you see organizations over automating today? It comes in the form of external communications and messaging. To Gwen, your point, this is something I think many of us have probably experienced, at least personally, in some kind of capacity as a consumer. So it seems to really map to some of the things that we have been talking about and sharing there. So just to transition for a bit, I would love to talk a little bit more about some of the human capital and HR implications
Yeah.
of this conversation. This is selfishly because this is the world I live and breathe in all day, but also because I know some other folks who are here are also interested in this. I think one of the things I'm actually interested in hearing your perspective on, because you are starting to use AI quite a bit inside of your organization, is really around how this changes the whole conversation around performance. And for
Hmm.
that matter, how you, I should say, define high performance. Because, I see a world where, and I will just call it a pre-AI world where to a certain degree, we can document what performance looks like in the sense of what are humans capable of, their skills, their abilities, et cetera, and translating that to how an organization delivers value. When all of a sudden you throw in AI tools, whether it's just the software itself, whether it's actual agents that are actually performing tasks and activities, whether they're generating novel ideas, to me, you start to enter a really interesting conversation in terms of one, what they're capable of doing, but for that matter, too, how that might raise a human's ability who is managing these things or using these things to elevate their work. And so, anyway, long way of asking,
Yeah.
how are you thinking about what high
Yeah.
performance means inside of your organization?
Yeah. And I'll kind of reiterate something I actually opened with. I think there's two pieces, and this even actually connects to what you were saying about some of just, the mindset and kind of some of those things that makes human. But I would say the two big things are like people that are curious and are willing to learn
Mhm.
by
Yeah.
doing, and they're willing to get outside of their comfort zone. So, for instance, one of the things that I'm sure many people can relate to, timesheets is the blessing and the curse for an organization like ours, right? We are do bill our clients based on hourly rates and all of that kind of stuff. So having our people do their timesheets to a high level of fidelity is incredibly important. But we also know, I call that one of the vegetable things, even for myself, because it's like the lowest thing on your list. You want to focus on the other pieces. So we have one of our team members, I think this is still a little bit under wraps for anybody listening from Chrometrics, but he has created a vibe coded. I think he's, I think he's calling it the stalker. That probably isn't a great phrase for all of the HR professionals here, but basically being able to scrape what he's doing. So whether it's Slack messages, whether it's his calendar, whether it's actually there, and then using AI to determine, okay, so today, from what I saw, and you were posted in these Slack channels or had these questions, this is how your day actually looks. And then trying to figure out how can we actually connect it to our harvest timekeeping service in order to log it. And it's like, man, that could be revolutionary for us. And so here's somebody that stepped outside of their comfort zone. They identified a problem, and a problem a lot of people in professional services have, and were able to start experimenting with this thing. So now he's going to, he's sharing it with a couple other people. They're trying to get it to see, we need a pretty high fidelity on that and to see where it is. And so as you go back to high performance, so much of it actually starts with that mindset, right? Getting out of your comfort zone, learning by doing, taking initiative, all of those types of things. And then I think it's really about, how are you leveraging the technology to take care of all those those vegetable things to start, to help you, support you and empower you, and then where you go. And I think, we're looking at things, for instance, such as like, can we do a better job at like having those individual dashboards? So it's very clear, we say, again, we drive tangible growth. So it's like, are you driving tangible growth for your client? Yes or no? Are you retaining your client? Yes or no? Do you have, an influential client relationship? Yes or no? And we might go yes, no, maybe, add context, like that's some of the stuff. But these are things that we're going to start building and testing out, because we also want to take out the bias. And I think that's one of the
Mm.
interesting things when you think about human beings, right? Of we have a lot of bias, a lot of
Yeah.
unconscious bias, right? We've all been
Mhm.
through. I think over the last number of years, it's been great because there's been just such a more like spotlight shined on that. And so it also goes to like, how do you take out that bias and really look at a lot of the objective criteria and be able to make those determinations where it's not, somebody's input here, somebody gave feedback, or somebody just doesn't like the person and that kind of fits into it. But it's really just black and white, and gives that kind of clear assessment of where they are and where they need to be, and then how they can get there.
So, what's interesting, I want to throw into two other stories and data points that I've observed recently in this conversation on performance. So, the idea behind both of these are around how AI can help both simultaneously raise the floor as well as to
Hmm.
raise the ceiling. So, on the floor piece, there was a really interesting research done in 2024 and 2025 between Harvard Business School, Wharton, and the Boston Consulting Group, where they ran a bunch of controlled experiments. And basically, what they found was that when they evaluated teams on a project that used were just humans, teams that were just solely using AI, and teams that were using humans plus AI, what they essentially found was that the AI helped the lowest performers basically rise pretty significantly, much more than the high performers. And to a certain degree, that makes sense, right? When you give someone who is more elementary and you give them essentially superpowers, it significantly raises the floor. And so, in some respects, when it comes to performance, you could see AI raising the floor. But on the flip side of it is this idea of being able to raise the ceiling. And
Yeah.
it was recently at a dinner with the CHRO, and one of the things that they were talking about was we actually want to use AI to have more experiments fail. And their thinking behind this is let's just say right now I can run 20 experiments and I'm going to fail at 19, but I have one that breaks through. Well, with AI, what if I can fail, at 5x the rate? Because that's also going to mean that I'm also going to have 5x of the things that really hit. And that
Hmm.
in some ways kind of expands performance. And so I think I think the possibility when it comes to this conversation around performance is how do you find ways to maybe do both? And I think, at least from
Yeah.
what I've seen so far, I don't know what you've seen or how you've seen this. I think there's definitely a lot of conversation on the floor piece, naturally so. But to me at least, I get really excited about the ceiling piece in terms of like, what else could we be doing that we're not doing right now that would allow us to create new value or to drive more impact in other types of ways? That to me is really exciting.
I love that because I'm a big believer in like what is the new to the world
Yeah.
things that we would have the time and the space to think about and to ideate and to try out if we weren't doing all of these vegetable
Right.
things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and I think to your point, I mean, again, we're an experimentation organization at the core. We started as, conversion rate optimization. And so that's kind of in our, the scientific method is literally like runs through our veins. And so as you talk about some of these experiments and wanting them to fail, when things fail, you're actually de-risking them because you've done them as an
Yes.
experiment, as opposed to saying like, this is this is a silver bullet. We're going to put it out in the world and then we're going to cross our fingers that it works. And
Hmm.
so I think that's a huge piece of it. And now, I think even just as we were talking about earlier with vibe coding, like it puts the tools in somebody's hands. You don't have to say, oh, I need to go talk to my tech team about building this thing. Or
Sure.
like, hey, I have this idea. I don't know how to go about it. Let me get in touch with my product guy and do it. It's like
Right.
you can actually have more control and try things out. And it's, a little time investment, but you kind of quickly learn by doing to determine like, hey, is there something here? And then where does it go from there?
So there's a comment in the chat that I think illustrates what you're saying, and this is from Aaron, who says, "Curiosity, intelligent risk-taking are core superpowers that we need to foster with people across the board. The challenge is that, not unlike other behaviors, these are traits that are pretty baked into people, or not by the time they are
Mhm.
adults. Getting people that don't already have them to acquire them requires a lot of intentional and focused
Yeah.
training. Definitely could see that there. And maybe on this notion, one area that I am curious to get your thoughts on is around this topic of career paths and progression,
Mhm.
particularly as it relates, to the fact that there are probably some things that you can start to automate, and that maybe you would have given to someone who was a little bit more junior, but now you don't have to do that. I think about this, and I think it ties actually to Aaron's question, because the flip side of this is that if you do have the things that Erin is saying in her comment, regardless of whether you're a junior intern or the CEO, you might have a path in this new world, because those are the types of things that we need. So packaging all this together, I'm
Yeah.
just curious, how should HR leaders really think about progression and career paths, knowing that some of the traditional, I think, ways we would have considered may have been fine for the years of the past, but looking forward and just
Yeah.
seeing what these technologies can do may not apply as much.
Yeah. And I think actually, I mean, one of the pushes I would say to that, and even earlier today, a few of us executives, we were talking about like, what is the chrometrics we want to be in a year from now? Like, what does that look
Mm.
like? And
Yeah,
how do
sure.
we take where we've been, how we've started embedding AI into our workflows, the way we've been organizing our team, and saying, okay, now like, how do we always just make sure we're like pushing ourselves toward what that is? And so, with that question and with that comment, which I love for two reasons, I'll start with kind of the first and then I'll jump into a second, is because essentially what you're trying to say is like, even the career paths that exist today in the organization are probably not going to be the same ones a year from now. And so,
Sure.
really, it is, and this is why like my framing is always like, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the
Yeah.
client needs that they have that we can uniquely serve today, or we would like to serve because we're close enough to be able to hand over heart do that. And so, when you think about career pathing, yes, you need to have the guidance, but I always personally struggle when somebody wants the extremely clear bulleted list, like what, like tell me
Yeah.
exactly what
Sure.
I need to do to get a promotion, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, here are the things you need to demonstrate. Here are the things that like, and yes, we have our success criteria and all of that kind of stuff. But I think I would encourage people leaders to also be thinking about, you know, who are those people, or encourage your entire staff to say, you know, where do you see the opportunities? We have laid out, here are our goals, here is our strategy. you know what the kind of traditional career paths are, but what are we missing? What can you bring to the
Hmm.
table, right? Everybody's
Yeah.
talking now about like an AI operations person, that's kind of managing the entirety of the workflow, that's helping to kind of, the agent that's going to be managing all these agents, like all of that kind of
Right.
stuff becomes new to the world. And I'm a big believer. My team that's listening in is going to laugh when I always say, play to your strengths and raise your
Mhm.
hand for what you see.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that would be my encouragement to people leaders, because yes, we're always going to, have to some extent some of the tried and true career progressions, but the people that are really going to thrive in this, this is we're in a world of gray, right? Things are changing so rapidly, and it's about
Hmm.
those folks that are resilient, that are leaning into the, the ambiguity, and they want to be part of it and help to chart kind of their own path within the org based on some of those problems to solve and the client needs.
So there's a whole other set of questions I would love to ask you, and I know we're coming up on time, but I do believe we may have another poll question in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And so if we do, if we could get that poll question fired up and running. And so the question is, do you see trust becoming a measurable organizational asset in AI-enabled companies? And your answers are yes, it will become an individually tracked KPI. Yes, but only measurable through proxy metrics such as NPS, Net Promoter Score, churn, complaint rate. Not reliably measurable, but still strategically critical. And or no, trust is too context dependent to quantify. So if you're still with us, feel free to take that poll. We'll see where everyone stands on this. But Gwen, I'll give you another chance
Yeah.
to share your thoughts on this. But yeah,
Yeah.
trust is a measurable organizational asset in measuring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for those of you that are familiar, Edelman does their trust barometer every year, right? And they're looking at the companies and they have a number of different metrics about trust. And my sense is that this is going to continue to change, evolve, and ebb and flow, right? Of if you think about what is the core of trust, it's almost trying to unpack what that even means. And it's like you have confidence in something. You can, confidence, reliability, belief that it's real. And I think as more things do become automated, it's like I assume when I go into an e-commerce site and I am buying my Bombas socks, which I am wearing now and I love, um, a lot of that is actually very much automated. And so the trust is more of that, the process, that the workflow, that the experience that I'm having, whether that's, whether there's humans kind of or where they are behind the scenes or not, that is driving it forward. And so I almost think that like the core tenets that underneath trust are going to be the same, but the how, that's where you go back into the what versus the how it kind of won't matter. Now where companies are probably going to, screw up as they have had some missteps is when AI gets over its skis or something is over automated and then it doesn't drive in that confidence, that reliability, that like belief, and that stuff starts to break down.
All right, so the responses are coming
Yeah.
in. So interestingly enough, a little bit of yes, it will become an individually tracked KPI. All right, so there we have it. Couple more questions here, and maybe just to pivot this to I think the last part of our conversation
Yeah.
before we wrap up. If you think about some of the strategic kind of implications of AI, and really thinking about at the results, right?
Yep.
So I guess like maybe as a starting point this year, what do you think is going to distinguish an organization that has really adopted AI well, is starting to use AI to work in new ways versus ones that perhaps are implementing it, but maybe not necessarily just or actually, getting value out of it or
Yeah.
using it in different ways.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two metrics, and these aren't going to be revolutionary. Everybody's heard of them, but it is impact and it is value. And
Mm,
so it's like those two equations are changing rapidly. And again,
yeah,
from my point of
yeah.
view, impact is the number one thing that we need to be delivering on for our clients every single day, where they are seeing the impact of the work we do for them and with them in their financial results. And one of the things that, we deal with this all the time internally is human beings are very good at doing the thing to get to the impact, but sometimes
Yes.
they miss the forest for the trees. They're like, but I've
Hmm.
done all the things. And I'm like, but you haven't gotten the impact. So we got to pivot. And maybe the things we're doing aren't the right things. And, do we have, maybe there's a piece of context, maybe there's some consumer data that we really need to learn and understand and get underneath. I can go off a whole tangent on consumer behavior. I'm fascinated by it, but that's probably a topic for another day. So I think that's going to always be the core thing is like, what truly does impact look like? What does success look like? And then what are the
Hmm.
ways to get there? And how do you help your humans? Again, this is what we're supporting our teams every day and really focus on it's about the goal, not about just following the tried and true steps. Because, I always say it's like we're moving from a world of like best practices where there was a playbook and you could
Mm.
just wash,
Yeah,
rinse, repeat to
sure.
better practices where it's like what worked yesterday is not working today. And that's where a lot of the innovation and the creative problem solving comes. The second one I would say is the value equation. And I think
Hmm.
this is actually going to be much more appended in the not so distant future. And I mean, I'm sure everybody's, tuned into some of the sound bites from Davos the other week, but is as things get more efficient, as the human cost of labor goes down, and you have your humans focused on like the highest level of imagination, like how does that play a role in terms of
Mm.
cost? So, for
Yeah.
instance, for us, one of the things that we look at, if you think about the conversion rate optimization side of our company, we have engineers that build the tests, right? Well, we built and we have been in testing for an AI product called Apex to develop tests through AI. And again, that is
Mm.
not ready for prime time. We are not at 100% yet. So we have kind of humans and we have AI doing it at the same time. Well, what we're pushing our engineers is your value is less about actually doing the test because that will ultimately become AI. It's how are you being an engineering consultant to the marketing clients? How are you adding more of that value? How are you, your impact on their business because you have that deep technical expertise is bringing more to their team and more to their business versus just doing the tests. And so all of a sudden, that's where that value exchange changes. Like if you were just to look at a program where we were just primarily doing experiments, I mean, I'd love for us to be
Hmm.
in a position where the cost of that program actually goes down. Like, I can't wait for the day to be able to go to a client and say, guess what? We've, advanced far enough in terms of, our Apex AI that we're actually going to cut your fee for the same level of service. Like that is unheard
Right.
of in this world, but
Yeah. Hmm.
that's one of my goals of like how do you change that value equation for some of the work that can be automated and leverage AI? And then alternatively, say for those clients where our engineers are adding that value, have, a higher hourly rate, let's call it, because the impact that they're having now for the technical teams on the way that they think about, MarTech stacks and systems and all of that kind of stuff has a much higher value to it.
Sure. Yeah. 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 That's really the value. I think the value conversation is really fascinating, and it will be interesting to see on both sides of that how both firms react to that as well as customers react to that. Because on the customer side, I feel like that all sounds good until you get the bill for when a project goes really well, and you're like, wow, all of a sudden that looks a lot more. But I think
Right.
it's definitely in the direction that it's headed. Maybe last question before I open up the chat to more questions. Um, there are a lot of folks out here who are executives who are listening in and want to know about some of the insights in this conversation. I guess maybe to close it off, if you had to give CEOs or an executive one principle to guide AI adoption that doesn't involve implementing a tool or picking a
Hmm.
tool or anything like that, what would that principle be?
Yeah. So this is a perfect tee up, Al, because this goes into some of my kind of behavioral science stuff that I love. And
Hmm.
I am a big believer in anytime you have a technological shift. Obviously, right now it's AI, but I grew up in the era when like digital was a thing, and at ad
Hmm.
agencies we had a digital department, and it was it's the
Right.
same kind of thing. And so you're really trying to take some of the behavioral science principles and put them in action. And so my advice would be the one core principle is figure out how you can habit stack it with things that people
Mhm.
are already
Yeah.
doing.
Me too.
I'm a big believer in like meet people where they are. I think if I cringe at the companies that had AI mandates and, or to your point earlier on, like, oh, we're gonna, we're laying off people because we're using AI. It's like, well, then you failed as an organization because you weren't able to take all the goodness of the humans and what they were able to do and add more value. And so I would say, think about what are the workflows? What are the things that you're doing? How do you actually embed it and meet your people where they are so that they're naturally using it versus having it sit over here on the side and making it a forcing function because you're going to get a lot of, yeah, rejection, slow roll, all of that kind of stuff. And I just find anytime you leverage, that's one of my favorite behavioral science principles. There's a number of other ones, but it makes it a lot more seamless to integrate when you're meeting your people where they are.
I definitely share that interest in behavioral science. So habit stacking is definitely a great one for me. Okay, I want to turn it over to the chat. I would love to hear any questions that come in, and we have one to kick things off to get started. And so, Gwen, I'm going to turn this over to you. The question is, as managers, what are
Mhm.
first steps for integrating a meaningful integration of AI into our daily business? We'll just say like a workflow or someone's a manager's everyday work. We'll
Yeah.
put that as the
Yeah.
qualifier. Yep, go
So
ahead.
I would go back into like my three levels, and it kind of depends on each organization, right?
Hmm.
So at the very basic level is how are people using either ChatGPT or Claude, or another one of those LLMs for any type of kind of like integration. So whether
Yeah.
that is, guiding your team and saying, hey, we're going to try something like, hey, you usually come to me every day with a few questions that you have. Before you come to me, I want you to literally take your list and I want you to put it through one of the LLMs, get an answer, and then come to me with your question and with your answer. So that's kind of like tier one of just some of that, like again, habit stacking and trying to get them to use it where they are. The second piece is really understanding within the tech and tools that they already have in place, what are those AI capabilities? I think that's one of the lowest hanging fruits a lot of organizations have, where all of these, amazing software companies have spent a lot of time and effort and money embedding AI, and then the company that is now using those services is not using it. So if kind of I always say make sure you understand not only what are all the products that you have as part of your stack, but how are you using it? And I think
Hmm.
there's things that are constantly coming out, each and every day. We use Figma quite a bit. Figma over the last couple of months has really improved their AI capabilities kind of within that. And so you want people to be able to use that. I think, Lattice is one of the platforms we use. They have some of it. I know they have more kind of on their roadmap, and that's something we're staying very close to because what we'd like to have it is all of the people management stuff is actually within the platform instead of kind of coming and going. And then the third piece I would say is, are there custom things that you can either build from a vibe coding standpoint or from a custom GPT standpoint? So I talked a little bit about kind of this career coach. We have an enterprise OpenAI account, so we have connected, Slack and our Google Drives and our success criteria and all of that kind of stuff. And so one of the things we're building out is actually like a career coach custom GPT so that it can actually have some of the actual prompts. People can therefore use it. It's tailored to our business, not just kind of an off the shelf thing. But that is something that doesn't actually take a lot of time or a big lift. And it can be something that, again, can put more of the ownership on the employee versus on the manager, and then free up the time for the manager to do other high value things and make it so that when the employee comes to them to say, hey, we're having our quarterly career conversation, they have a much more kind of like informed path and some things that they are actually suggesting versus the question of how do I grow in my career here?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I can totally see the amount of possibilities that can come from that versus just staring at that blank page or not being able to generate them on their own. We still got some time for some questions. So if you have any questions that you'd love to ask, please feel free to put them in the chat. I have another one for you in the meantime while we wait
Yeah.
for other folks. I know we've talked a little bit about what we would like to see in terms of outside of in terms of workers, in terms of humans, in terms of how they use AI. But I'm curious if we could take the other side of that question for a second. If you think about the next couple of years, what do we
Mhm.
think might be the behaviors that will not serve leaders well, might hold them back as opposed to the things that we would be doing? But what do you see as things that could hold people back or not make them successful as the world of work continues to evolve and shift?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One is probably pretty evident, of people that just aren't willing to learn that. Again, I go back to the like when digital came out, and it's like some people were just allergic to it and didn't learn it, and
Right.
then they were kind of left behind in one way, sense, or form. I think some of the other problems that I am anticipating to come, one that actually happened in COVID, I think it's died down a bit, but is people actually being overemployed. Like if people are really good at AI, are we going to see a rise in people trying to have a couple full-time jobs? And then what does that mean? What does that look like, especially if it's kind of in remote companies? I think on the flip side, that could also go into, again, the gig economy just continues to grow and explode. And you think about some of the efficiency and some of the imagination that that's going to be able to drive. I do firmly believe that roles are going to evolve pretty significantly in what is required. So we talked about like, AI operations. Obviously, a couple of years ago, it was like a prompt engineer. Well, we're not hearing about prompt engineer anymore. Um, but those are a couple of things as we get back into the chat and see some of the other questions popping up.
Cool. So we've got one from Aaron. I've always wondered if we can leverage AI itself to determine if AI is being
Hmm.
used effectively across the organization. For example, if we identify the OKRs for the organization, and to have flow down all the way to individual OKRs and activities, can we use AI to look at whether our teams are producing or determining if those are aligning with their agreed upon goals? Any thoughts on can we use AI to see if we're using
Yeah.
AI effectively? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where like we're looking at, we're talking about some of these things like I mentioned, we're a very heavy Slack
Yeah.
culture. We have all of our channels open, like we really drive all of the communications through there. And that's some of the experiments that we're already running in terms of like scraping it. Can we score
Yep.
kind of like a client nine box? How are we doing on performance and potential in order to do that? And so I think absolutely. I think the key though is what is the QA? What is the human in the loop? How are you making sure that it's accurate, especially in kind of the early days before you have a high level of confidence in it?
Okay, here's another good one. What assumptions about efficiency, expertise, or scale no longer hold once AI becomes ambient or just more or less
Hmm.
just pervasive everywhere?
Yeah. I mean that's such like a meta
I
question, which I
know.
which
Yeah.
I love.
Same.
Um, because I think you go back to like is you think of the promise of the future, and I'll use the word the promise because there's
Right.
been
Sure.
some use
hmm
cases, but not there yet. But if you almost think about we're at some point in the not too distant future in a world where you have a number of different agents doing different tasks. You have an agent that is actually managing through that workflow. You have a high level of confidence that that workflow and the work that those agents and the the full workflow is doing is of high quality. Then I think you get into like, okay, well, you've made it as efficient as possible. Um, how then do those agents drive even a higher level of expertise? Like what is that almost like that next stair step in terms of where are the humans? How are they directing them? How are they pushing them? How are they keeping them in line? I think there's going to be some interesting things that come from that of like, how are you giving feedback to an agent like you're giving it to a human? Are there
Sure.
biases that are going to emerge that we don't know
Yep.
about? And then also like what become limitations in terms of scale? Because the promise is like you can just scale this to infinity, and the people that really harness it, there's going to be a high degree of success. But I think there's going to be some limitations that are going to start to show that we're not even cognizant of yet.
That's a great question to end on. So we could take it so many ways, but I believe that we are just about out of time. Thank you all for joining today, for being a part of this conversation, for asking such thoughtful questions. And thank you, Gwen, for being such a thoughtful guest. It was great to be able to have this discussion around the role of AI and humans as we navigate this changing world of work. And if you just joined us for this hour, thanks for spending time with us. We hope this was valuable for all of you. But thank you. And Misty, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, just thank you from our team as well, Gwen, Al, Annie, and Katie. We're very grateful for your time today, and we'll send the recording out on Monday.
All right.
Take care,
Thanks,
y'all.
everyone.
Happy
Thank
weekend.
you.